School lessons didn't have teachers in mind. And the reason for it is this Sunday's lesson, because it's the story of the three Hebrew children halfway. So, as my sister said, when I get done teaching today, go as far as you want to, John, and then say, to be continued. So, that is about what's going to happen. We're studying about Nebuchadnezzar today. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. And it says in the second year of King Nebuchadnezzar, and that's the first words, I think. Yeah, the first words in the second chapter, and we're studying in the third chapter. So, second year, that's sort of deceiving because which second year are they talking about? For 2 years, King Nebuchadnezzar was a king with his dad, Nebuchadnezzar, and they were serving the country or their nation, their empire, whatever you want to call it, together. And then the father passed away, and Nebuchadnezzar had to hustle home to take over the responsibilities of kingship. But as it turned out, Nebuchadnezzar was a great leader. And not only was he a good leader militarily, he was a good leader as far as administration, etc. is concerned, because he established a building program whereby the people of the nations that he had conquered were getting some of the money, or some of the taxes and tariffs and stuff was coming back and was a boon to them. So he was, in his way of handling things, winning over not only the peoples of the community or of the nations, but also the religious leaders as well. So here we start. To give context to our lesson, we need to go through chapter 2. So if you don't want to go through chapter 2, you're excused to leave. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then he spake to the Chaldeans, to the king in Syriac. Up until this point, it's written in Hebrew. Now we change to Aramaic. For those of you who are in language understanding, please make note and be uplifted with said knowledge.
Just make sure they always know it's Aramaic, not Arabic.
As the teacher said, it's Aramaic. Oh, never mind. My mind is going places it shouldn't. All right. Now, who were the astrologers, magicians, and sorcerers? I said to myself, who are those people? The magicians were the experts in the occult arts, the group of practices and knowledges including astrology, demonology, spiritism, shamanism, and magic. All right. So what we got here is we got a tinge of people that were supposed to be able to enter into the supernatural realm. The astrologers are those who had supernatural knowledge through the study of the heavens. The sorcerers were the manipulators of supernatural powers via incantations, and the Chaldeans were the leaders in the priestly caste of the Babylonian society. So when he drew together the people, he drew the experts in the area of the supernatural and spiritual realms. And we read on. The king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we shall know the interpretation. And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, I have good news for you. The thing is gone from me. If you will not make known to me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made dunghill. Not a good outlook there. But if you show me the dream and the interpretations thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that you would gain the time, because you see the thing is gone from me. The king is starting to get a little irritated because they are pressing the issue of, you tell me the dream and I'll give you the interpretation. And the king said, no, you're going to tell me the dream and you're going to tell me the interpretation, else I know you're a fraud. And then they said, that's not fair. You're asking something from us that has never been asked of men before. Okay, you've asked us to not only tell you the dream, which only the gods can know that. And these are the gods that don't dwell with men on earth. And so the king had them kind of in a bind. Now, it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king except the gods who are dwelling not in flesh. For this cause was the king angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. All right, from last Sunday's lesson, we remember that Daniel and the three Hebrew boys, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, had been tested by the king and found out that they were intellectually better, 10 times better than all the rest of the people that had gone through the training program. And so they had been promoted, and since they had been promoted, for some reason they weren't included in this gang here that the king called together. And so he says, you guys are done, it's time to put your heads off and we make your houses dunghills. And finally, when they started to round up the boys, they rounded up Daniel and the three Hebrew children, and they said to him, Daniel said, what in the world's the king in such a hurry about anyhow? And then it's something very interesting to me. King said to the other guys, you're wasting my time, you're trying to delay so that I forget what the dream is, or forget what I'm asking you about, and it'll slip aside. And Daniel goes in and says, King, give me some time. Somewhere along the line, Daniel had gained the respect of the king to the point where he put aside the former rule that the wise men were going to be killed, and Daniel got time that he needed. So Daniel did what? He went off to the three Hebrew children and he told them about what was going to take place, that the king was going to kill them unless they knew what the dream was and also knew the interpretation. Well, I regress. I failed to mention that when Daniel went in before the king, he says, King, give me some time, and I will not only tell you the dream, I will tell you what the interpretation of it is so that you know what is bugging you. Now, according to one of the writers I was reading after, it said that not only had Nebuchadnezzar done well militarily, and not only well as far as leadership, as far as the empire was concerned, but he had stopped his building program and was taking a period of time to analyze his life, and from a perspective from, the big picture look at it, and to see if he was doing the things he ought to and whatever. While this was going on, God was sending him a dream that troubled him in his sleep and also caused him to forget the dream. So the king said to old Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation of?" Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, magicians, soothsayers show unto the king, but there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. The dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these." So Daniel was put in a position of complexity, so to speak, where if he didn't deliver, his life was at stake. And when the king said, "Are you able to tell me what I need to know?" he did not try to take lost my word. Credit. Thank you. That's a big word. That's why I couldn't remember it. Studying all week to remember those big words, and never mind. So he didn't take credit for it, but he said, there is a God in heaven that is able to tell us what we need to know. Notice how respectful that Daniel is to King Nebuchadnezzar. All right. So what did Daniel do? He went home and he told his 3 Hebrew children and said, "We got to pray because we got an important church program that's going on, and no, he didn't say that. He says, we got problems and we need to pray." So they prayed, and what'd they do? They went to bed. It says in the night visions, God came to Daniel and gave him a vision of the dream, and not only the dream, but the interpretation of the dream. Okay? So the next morning, they get up and they go to the fellow that's supposed to be the executor, the one that does all the executions for the wise men, and says, "Arioch, we have an answer, and I need to see the king." And Arioch went with haste, it says, into the presence of the king and said, "We have found one from the people who were taken captive, and he is able to give you the dream." And so then what do we see? Chapter 2, verses 31. "O king, thou sawest, behold, a great image. The great image whose brightness was excellent before thee, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet of iron, and part of clay. Thou sawest that a stone was cut without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron and the clay and the brass and the silver and gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff to the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation thereof before the king." Then the king fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king said unto Daniel, "Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret." Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over the wise men. And since he did that, and knowing that the 3 Hebrew children were gifted in knowledge and things of that sort, Daniel requested that they be promoted as well. And now we have the Sunday school lesson. You didn't think we was ever going to get there, did you? All right, so here we are, have it. The king had, in chapter 3 then, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and the breadth thereof 6 cubits, 90 feet high by 9 feet wide, mounted up in a place where everybody could see. And not only was the image created, but it was placed there, and then to have a grand celebration of institution of the image, he invited all the chief people, all the ones that had responsibility in the land, and they were together in, and when they were together in, he gave a command that when the music begins to play, and then he listed off a gazillion instruments, he says, when that happens, you are all to fall down and to worship the idol. And then begins our Sunday school lesson. What happened? The music played and the people bowed down and worshiped, and
Three of them did not.
3 of them did not. Who were the 3?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Shadrach, Meshach, and under the bed we go. Where was Daniel? It's sort of an interesting thing. He's just missing at this event. And so it is speculated that he is probably off on king's business of some kind or the other, probably traveling in another nation or whatever. But here the 3 Hebrew children, or the 3 Hebrew boys were faced with what to do.
How do you spell Nebuchadnezzar?
Huh?
How do you spell Nebuchadnezzar?
You spell it by asking the teacher to give you a list, and it's on the top line on the left side. Thought you had me, didn't you? I'm not that great in spelling anyhow, so you did. All right, so there we are. Now, what took place after that? As in all, no, that's not the way I should say that. As in some companies in the world, there was a bit of jealousy that was being exposed. And they noticed that 3 of the boys did not bow down when it was time for the music to play. And so they went and reported it to the king. Bless their hearts. As the old Southern saying, you can say anything you want to about somebody as long as you end up with bless your heart. So there they were at the king, notifying the king that there are people in your kingdom that are not worshiping your gods and your images that you have done. Okay. And not only that, they refused to bow down as you specifically gave us commandments to do. They are not following your orders, Mr. King. And so the king was angry. And he called the boys in and he said, boys, what I've heard, I'll give you a second chance. Nothing is said about what's your side of the story, boys. Nothing said about that. Nothing said about some other things. Just, here's your second chance. But if you fail, into the fiery furnace you go. Now, got a couple questions for you. When the king was having a dream, and apparently the dream was of this idol that he had created, and he forgot it, do you think he really forgot that what the dream was, or do you think he was testing out some people such as were the experts of the land in the knowledge of astrology, etc.? What's your opinion?
I just thought he was testing them. That was my opinion.
Okay, so you didn't think he forgot it at all.
He was already angry at them because they couldn't do it, so he had to make up an excuse, and that's what I thought he did. He didn't really forget it.
Okay.
But maybe that was God's working, and he actually did forget it for a minute, so he could get to God's plan.
What's some of the rest of you think? I had never looked at it that way before. I'd always looked at it as a fact as that the king said, you can't do it, I'm mad at you, and I'm going to put you down. That's the way I always looked at it. It never occurred to me that old King Nebuchadnezzar was being a little savvy here and doing a little testing. Why was he testing? Well, if he couldn't trust that they could get the dream right, how could he trust that the interpretation was going to be right as well? So he was, I think there's some merit to that thought. Okay, now let's see if we can find another question or two. All right. When he interpreted the dream, when Daniel interpreted the dream for the king, what did he say the gold was, and the silver, and the bronze or brass, and the clay and the iron? Do you recall?
Well, I've wrote down from a previous study
Okay.
in the Bible that
Hopefully it was from somebody better than who you're listening to.
the bronze was Greek Empire, and the fourth kingdom, the iron, was the Roman Empire. And that's all I got, except for over where it talks about the image head was of fine gold, his chest and arms, where it talks about that. I wrote on the side Jesus.
All right. Gold was the Babylonian Empire. Pretty well, everyone agrees on that. The silver was the Medes and the Persians, their empire. The bronze was the Roman Empire. And the next one is the Greek Empire. So who's the stone that was cut out of the mountain? Jesus Christ. And what does it say about it? It shall fill the whole world, okay? And so there's kind of the interpretation of your dream that you had. When the king set up the idol, what was his motive behind it? Why did he set it up, and what was his motive?
Compliance of the people.
Compliance of the people? Okay. What took place right before the building of the idol? We have the fact that the dream took place, and what was the confession of the king at the end of the dream when the interpretation was revealed to him? You serve the God of gods. There is no one like your gods because of what he's been able to reveal. One of the writers wrote that they believed that the king was setting up an idol to honor Daniel's God. Now think about that for a little bit. All right. What's the problem with setting up an idol to honor God?
God doesn't want you worshiping idols.
God doesn't want you worshiping idols. I think that's a good answer. All right. So let's assume that the king's motive was, I'm going to honor Daniel's God, and I'm going to honor him with creating an idol. What's the problem? We have a good motive, and what's the resulting action? Wrong. Okay? So, did the king sin when he set up the idol? And you say, yes, because the Mosaic law said, thou shalt not worship any idols, images. Okay? What's the phrase that goes with hell is paved with good intentions? Thank you. All right. How do we reconcile a king who is trying to honor Daniel's God And Daniel's God was the God of gods, so we make no mistake on who we're talking about that. How do we reconcile that with his motive that was improper?
You didn't know.
He didn't know, okay? Misguided. One of the writers said he was acting out of ignorance, okay? He hadn't been taught yet because his nation was a nation of multiple gods and many different instances of angelic beings, etc. Okay. Now, I think we've spent time in this class before talking about the fact that you don't have to know everything in order for you to honor God and to live right. How do we reconcile the fact that he did something with good intentions but was wrong?
Because he carried it out in a way that wasn't according to God's law to begin with. He then asked people to bow down to it.
Yes, but he's bowing down, he's asking them to bow down to
What he thought was
Daniel's, a representation of Daniel's God. No one see a problem with this? It's just me?
no, there's a problem.
How did he get this idea to do that? Daniel never said anything about that.
Well, if you grew up with 100 gods in your house, okay, and then somebody says, I'm bringing your friend in here, and I want you to honor him, and so on, and I want you to give him the best honor you can. If you grew up with that mentality, you would say, well, I'll get a god for him. Okay? Well, I'm leading myself out in Timbuktu here. I looked up the word what motive meant, and it says it implies an emotion or desire operating on the will and causing it to act. I think the reason the king was so angry when Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael didn't bow down was because the God that he was trying to honor, Daniel's God, they didn't even bother to fall down and worship.
John, I don't think Nebuchadnezzar had those good intentions. I think Nebuchadnezzar heard this dream about he was the gold, you know what I mean, in the top of the statue, you know what I mean?
Yeah?
I don't think he listened to anything else, you know what I mean? Much. So I think that statue was Nebuchadnezzar, not God's image.
That's what I originally thought,
I think,
yeah.
I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but I think he took the gold thing, you know what I mean, and went a little overboard. And, I mean, what, I mean, and I know it doesn't say, so I can't say, look at this or look at that or whatever, but that's the image that I get, was when he heard this gold, that he was the gold, he was the head, boom, all of a sudden we got this big statue of the golden statue. And the reason that he got all mad was that it was a personal affront, you know what I mean, to him, that they wouldn't do this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, he supposedly had this so much respect for him, but, you know, they kind of got set up, you know, about, you know, these other people kind of set him up, you know what I mean, that you know, these three aren't doing what you said, and you know what I mean, and, you know, kind of backed him right into the corner, like.
Well, we're a democratic class. How many of you think Terry's wrong? No. How many of you think that Nebuchadnezzar was making himself, identified himself with the idol? Am I saying you're right?
Yeah.
And so therefore, if you didn't bow down, you weren't bowing down to him. All right? Okay. I don't have a problem with you voting. I don't have a problem with you not voting. Yes?
Well, like verse 46 in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel and commanded that an offering of incense be offered up to him. So I feel like even though he might acknowledge God's presence, this is the clear indication he still doesn't get it. Like he doesn't understand. He's making an offering to another human being instead of directly to God there for giving the interpretation of the dream. So I feel like Nebuchadnezzar is still missing.
Let's jump over to the New Testament. Acts, the 10th chapter, I think it is. Peter is sent for by a Roman centurion. And he says, go get him and bring him back here and have him preach to us, okay? And when Peter walks in the door, what happens? Cornelius falls on his face before Peter, and Peter does what? Grabs him and picks him up and says, I'm just a man like you are. I put my pants on one leg at a time. And he says, and you don't give me that honor, you say that for God. Now, I found that interesting that a similar type activity did not take place between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. I thought it was interesting in my mind, even though I'm dead wrong apparently, that there was a viewpoint that Nebuchadnezzar was trying to honor Daniel's God, and here was people that should have been respecting that and was not following. Okay? And so we go on there. So we get to the point then, oh man, you guys are listening fast. We are getting then to the point where the three Hebrew children are in front of King Nebuchadnezzar, and they're called to task. And he says, I'm going to give you one more chance. And what was the boy's response to the king? The response was, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. What is that an example of? Faith. Minimal faith, monumental faith, okay? And what did one of the writers say? True faith is not linked to circumstances or consequences. It is founded upon the immutable faithfulness of God. So they were basing their actions on what they knew to be right, based upon their faith in their immutable God, unchanging God. And they said, he is able to deliver us from that burning fiery furnace and from you, buddy. Now, what had the king just said to him? Who God is able to save you from the fiery furnace? He had gone through many lands and many countries, and they had prayed to their gods, and he slew them anyway, and he took them over. And so he had evidence in his mind and his back pocket that said, I don't care whose your God is, we can handle them, and there's not a problem here. And so Nebuchadnezzar knew he was the top dog here, and he was in control. And so the three Hebrew children, they say, hey, our God's able to deliver us, and he'll take care of you too, buddy. And he said, but if not, if God chooses not to save us, just write this down in your book, Buster, that we ain't going to bow to your image. And so they had made a choice that they were going to be true to their own God, and they were going to stand firm and true. Now, they put their life on the line, and they chose to be righteous and holy. What will you and I do to choose the way of salvation, the way of truth and righteousness, to put ourselves on the line that God can be honored. And the story is to be continued. Comments and questions? I think I covered everything.
My Bible says that the statue that was erected was made entirely of gold.
And according to what I read, it was an overlayment of gold, not a solid gold.
Sure, but the point that I was getting at was he didn't even construct the statue in the way that his dream described. It says that the statue was made of gold and was supposed to more or less depict Nebuchadnezzar, and it says Nebuchadnezzar showed his devotion to Daniel's God, and that was short-lived. He neither feared nor obeyed God, who was behind the dream.
But the dream was different than the construction. Is that your point?
That's my point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The dream is different than the construction that resulted, because the construction or the dream had various metals, etc., involved. Yep. What else? Was it necessary that the 3 Hebrew boys made the choice to stand regardless?
Yeah. Part of the dream.
Yeah. There was a world watching. Okay. There was a world watching the boys to see what they would do. Well, I'm trying to get out of it from going in the next Sunday's lesson.
Well, it sure gives a lot of credibility to the fact that God will walk with you if you let him.
Yeah.
I mean, when they saw 4 people walking around in there.
You're in next Sunday's lesson. Now get out of there.
What was this furnace like? Just a bunch of burning logs open, or what was it really?
Back in those days, they had metal plants where they would melt down the stone and the ore and stuff like that, and they would channel the winds into a furnace so that they could heat it up much more. So there was initial wood, etc., that got things started, but also the winds were directed in to cause the heat to be exacerbated.
No, it's just asking. Question before.
She's trying to study for next Sunday's lesson. I had one more thing to say, and of course I forgot it.
When it comes to the statue, totally gold, if it was pure gold, would not be strong enough to be that large and that high. It would have to have the foundation internally of all of those metals that were basically, and an overlay of gold then, of course, was kind of like the pride of Nebuchadnezzar, I think.
Yeah.
That's true.
Anything else? I guess the one thing I forgot to say was have a great week. All right, come back and we'll see how this comes out, because I think it's a hot story.
See ya. Good job. You got a big day ahead of you.
I know what I was going to say now.
Oh, you did. What was it?
I think God was in the process of getting to a pagan king's heart, and he's using the dream to get to him, because he was pondering already what the big picture of his life, etc., in the world was.
How many years was he a king? 8 hours?
Oh, I don't know that. I don't know.
Look at your chart. Look at your chart.
It isn't on the chart because it's a Babylonian king.
Oh,